Here now is Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, a former Navy JAG officer who served right across the street from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Congressman, we forget, and so it's so important to remember that what started this was not the killing of Soleimani. It was the attacks on the U.S. Embassy, which were being directed by Soleimani, right?
That's exactly right. So many people just think that the timeline started when we took out Soleimani. They forget about the Iranians storming our embassy a week before that. They forget about the Iranians shooting rockets into U.S. and Iraqi bases that actually killed an American. They forget about the fact that the Iranians shot down a $100 million drone, the fact that they seized a British oil tanker. You're absolutely correct, but I can tell you, we're safer today than we were before because a red line has been drawn. The Iranians know they can no longer kill Americans. They can no longer storm our embassy without there being repercussions from this president.
Congressman, I was able to sit down with the Crown Prince, the former Crown Prince of Iran yesterday, and we talked about this notion of de-escalation. We talked about the president wanting them to come to the negotiating table. And I asked him, with this regime being in power for 40 years, with the deep roots of Islamic culture and beliefs, if you will, that are spread within the region, if it's even possible to have a dialogue, or if this is just going to become tit-for-tat escalation. And I didn't know about the 11 who were injured. Of course, that was new news coming out overnight.
Well, it's a shame that there were 11 injured, but the key is that nobody was killed. And also, Soleimani can no longer continue to plan attacks. He can no longer orchestrate Shia militia groups to rocket U.S. bases or to plant IEDs. So we've isolated that threat. But I am cautiously optimistic on Iran moving forward. They have significant issues domestically. The Ayatollah's speech might have sounded like it was saber-rattling. What that really was the Ayatollah trying to save face and trying to put down pressure that he has from the pro-democracy movement within his own country.
All right, I want to give Jonas a chance, but we just had a tweet coming in from the president tweeting out, quote, the so-called supreme leader of Iran, who has not been so supreme lately, had some nasty things to say about the U.S. and Europe. Their economy is crashing. Their people are suffering. He should be very careful with his words, to which you would respond what, Congressman?
Well, this is a nation that's on the brink of chaos with Iran. They've put down, they're trying to put down these demonstrations, and they've ruthlessly killed up to 1,500 individuals. So this is an Ayatollah, this is a regime that's barely hanging on. That's why we have got to work with our European allies to make sure we continue the maximum applied pressure so we deprive this regime of money and the resources necessary to spread terror through the region. And hopefully they'll collapse from within through the pro-democracy movement that's emerging.
Guy,
Congressman, it's funny.
Hold on a
I'm
second.
sorry you
Go
mentioned.
ahead, Jonas.
Guy, I like the idea of taking out the best and brightest, so to say, of your enemy, especially when they do terrorist attacks. But do you think the replacement guy, this gets into the risk reward of this whole thing, is going to be more or less hostile to U.S. interests abroad?
Well, he certainly won't be the mastermind that Soleimani was. Soleimani was the equivalent of the CIA director, the commanding officer of JSOC, or Joint Operations, and he had this aura about him, almost like a General Patton type. So he's not going to have that gravitas that Soleimani did. But it's very important to note, we've now told the Iranians there will be repercussions. Iranian generals can't come into Baghdad to plan attack on our embassy and to plan attack on our allies and our U.S. service members.
Congressman, I want to switch to the impeachment trial. You were on the House Judiciary Committee. You still are, so you watch it with great interest. Yes. It's a big question about whether we're going to hear from witnesses. Republicans, of course, are claiming that witnesses would turn the trial even into a bigger sham than what they say it already is. Democrats say not to have witnesses amounts to a cover-up. But one of the Democrats wailing the loudest about witnesses was singing a very different tune about 21 years ago when he participated in the Bill Clinton trial. Here's what Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer said about the impeachment witnesses back then. Listen.
This idea that they didn't have to call witnesses in the House and they should call them in the Senate doesn't make sense. You call witnesses before a grand jury and you call witnesses before a trial.
So, Congressman, which Schumer has it right?
The Schumer from the 1990s has it absolutely correct. This is a two-step process. The House investigates. They're the investigative body, and the Senate tries the case. So the fact that Democrats want witnesses now in the Senate shows you how weak and flimsy this case was in the House. Nancy Pelosi, Chairman Schiff, Chairman Nadler, they should have called these witnesses in the House during the investigation. They didn't because they knew executive privilege would be invoked and it would bust their political timeline. They wanted this done before Christmas. So now Chuck Schumer has a mess in the Senate.
Gary?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was me. Congressman, thanks for being on the show. Where do you see the timeline going right now? It sounds like we've had weeks of posturing from Pelosi and company. Now it's in McConnell's shoes. Do you think this gets resolved quickly, or do you think it's spread out? And what benefits President Trump the most, do you think? Quick or spread out so he's fully exonerated?
You know, the longer this lingers, the more President Trump improves in the polls with swing voters. So I think the longer this goes on, the better is it for President Trump. It also pulls the Democrat nominees or the Democrat candidates away from the campaign trail. You know, there were rumors around here in Congress that Nancy Pelosi actually sat on the articles of impeachment because she wanted to give an unfair advantage to Joe Biden, basically to keep Bernie Sanders in session dealing with impeachment. So it would be the second time the Democrat establishment has sandbagged Bernie Sanders. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's certainly the rumor mill in Congress that's why she did that, was to give him, Joe Biden, an unfair advantage.
So you don't know if it's true, but you're happy to pass it along on national television whether or not it's true, correct?
Well, it's a speculation, but it does make sense. Again, there's a history for the Democrat Party trying to sandbag Bernie Sanders. It also hurts Elizabeth Warren.
And do you think?
Quickly, Adam, go ahead.
Okay. Do you agree with the characterization that the proceedings your colleagues did in the House constitute a hoax and a sham?
I do. This is a very weak case. As a former district judge, I would dismiss both articles for lack of merit. The evidence isn't there to support this. This has been a political hit job from the start.
Congressman, great to see you again. And again, thank you for your service to our country when you were in the service. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Backlash from the left after